Hello and welcome to tonight's journey. Before we begin, try to relax your shoulders for a moment. Take a slow breath in and let every sound out there gently drift away like waves retreating from a darkened shore. If you are listening to this story at night, tell me where you are and what time it is where you are sitting right now. Perhaps you are in a quiet room after a long day in a small work corner still lit by a lamp, or tucked into a warm bed ready to close your eyes. Wherever you are tonight, we will leave the familiar world behind. We are going down beneath the surface of the sea, but not into the ocean of today. Not into blue waters crossed by ships, not to a beach filled with sunlight and human voices. We are going back to the ancient oceans, when Earth was still profoundly unfamiliar, when there were no humans, no cities, and no maps to give names to the seas. Beneath those dark waters, life was experimenting with some of its strangest forms. Circular mouths, like living doorways, hardened armor, enormous claws, jaws capable of crushing prey, long reptilian shadows gliding through the deep, and finally predators so large that a single fossilized tooth is enough to make our imagination tremble. So were the ancient oceans truly more terrifying than we ever imagined. Lie still, listen slowly, and come with me as we descend into the waters of hundreds of millions of years ago. Imagine you are drifting down into a sea from a very distant past, so distant that everything familiar in the world today has not yet come into being. There is no sound of ships offshore, no schools of silver fish glittering beneath the sunlight, no whales singing in the deep ocean, no sharks gliding silently past coral reefs, and no human being standing on a sandy shore looking down at the water and wondering what might be waiting beneath. Before you, there is only an ancient ocean, dark blue silence spread across an earth, still very different from the planet we know. This is the sea of the Cambrian period, more than 500 million years ago. If you could set foot in this place, the first thing that might send a shiver through you would not be a roar, a gigantic jaw, or a long dark shadow like those in stories of sea monsters. The true fear lies in the feeling of strangeness. Every creature around you seems as if it has stepped out of an unfinished dream of life. Some carry hard shells. Some crawl across the sea floor on tiny legs like threads. Some look like swimming leaves. Some have eyes, spines, tendrils, fins, mouths, yet follow no familiar shape held in human memory. The light from the surface falls very gently. It is not bright, like the tropical beaches of today, but dimmer, softer, as though the entire ocean is being lit by a distant blue lamp. Below the seafloor is not as still as we might imagine. Small creatures creep across the fine mud. Hard shells appear and disappear among the sand. Soft bodies contract, stretch, and vanish behind ridges of stone. There is no clear sound, but if you could feel with your whole body, you would sense that this place is always moving. In that world, life has not yet created the gigantic monsters that would come later. But it has begun to learn one very important thing: predation. Before this, the sea may once have been more like a quiet garden, where many creatures clung to the seafloor, filtered food drifted with the current, or lived in slower ways. But by the Cambrian, the game was beginning to change. There were eyes to see, shells for defense, spines to resist others, speed to escape. And then there were creatures born not only to survive, but to chase, seize, and devour other living things. That was a profound turning point in the history of life. Not the turning point of a king, a battle, or an empire as in human history, This was something quieter, older, unfolding in dim blue water, among small bodies that did not yet have names. One animal began to grow harder because something wanted to eat it. Another learned to move faster because if it slowed down, it would vanish. A creature developed better eyes, not to admire the beauty of the ocean, but to see danger before it was too late. If you bend closer to the seafloor, you might see trilobites, one of the most famous images of the Cambrian world. They are not monsters. They resemble small armored creatures, their bodies divided into many segments, crawling slowly over the mud like living metal leaves. Some are as small as a fingernail, some are larger, but all of them carry a clear message. In this ocean, a soft body is a risk. A hard shell is a plea to live one more day. But a hard shell is not a guarantee, because above the seabed in more open water shapes are swimming. Not fish, not squid, not any modern creature we can easily name. They belong to an ancient branch of life, a group of creatures that today remain only as fossils and scientific reconstructions. Among them, the most often mentioned name is Anomalocaris. To modern human eyes, Anomalocaris might make us hold our breath for a moment. Its body is long and flattened with soft swimming lobes, arranged along both sides like rows of paddles. At the front of its head are two curved appendages lined with small spines, like two arms used to grasp prey. Its mouth is not like the mouth of a fish or a shark. It is circular, hard arranged in pieces like a strange ring-shaped doorway, as if the ocean had tried to invent a kind of jaw before discovering more familiar designs in later ages. In our world, a creature less than a meter long might not frighten anyone. But in the Cambrian Sea, where many creatures are still very small, Anomalocaris is a large shadow. It does not need to be as big as a whale to dominate the imagination of its age. It only needs to swim through those shallow waters, silently, slowly, with eyes looking all around and its two front appendages always ready to close. To the small creatures crawling beneath it, its appearance may have felt like the sun being covered for a moment. Imagine a trilobite crawling across the muddy bottom. It does not know that it is a fossil of the future. It does not know that hundreds of millions of years later, humans will find its shape in stone and place it in a museum. In that moment, it is simply a small creature living in its own world. Beneath its body is soft mud. Above it is water. Around it are chemical traces, faint vibrations, pale darkness. Then, somewhere in the water, a larger movement appears. Anomalocaris does not charge like a monster in a film. The ancient ocean does not need loud hunting scenes to become terrifying. It only needs the right movement at the right moment. The lobes along its sides push its body forward. The two front appendages open. A shadow passes. The prey may curl in on itself, twist away, try to hide in the mud, or press itself into a crevice. But in the new world of the Cambrian, defense and predation are learning to evolve together. Every time a creature escapes death, it leaves a lesson in the bodies of future generations. Every time a predator catches its prey, the ocean remembers a more effective way to hunt. What makes the first chapter of this story so special is the youth of everything. This is not an ocean already accustomed to sharks, whales, coral reefs, and migrating fish. This is a vast workshop of life. Forms are created, tested, transformed, and many of them vanish forever. There are creatures that look like leaves with legs. Creatures like soft brushes drifting through the water. Creatures with 5 eyes. creatures carrying spines on their backs like a tiny warning sent out to the whole world. If you look long enough, you may feel that you are not observing the past, but wandering through another planet. And on that underwater planet, the idea of a monster must be understood differently. A monster is not necessarily the largest creature. A monster is a creature that changes the way other species must live. One early predator appears, and immediately other bodies must respond. Shells become thicker, spines grow longer, eyes become better. The ways of crawling, hiding, curling up, burying into the mud, all become part of an ancient conversation between life and death. Perhaps that is why Anomalocaris continues to haunt our imagination. It is not only a strange creature in a museum. It is the trace of the moment when the sea began to become dangerous in a new way. Before it, fear may have been vague. After it, every small creature in the water seemed forced to live with a silent question. Is something watching me? Is something coming closer? And if the water above suddenly darkens, is it only the shadow of a cloud or a body swimming overhead? In a place that today is part of the mountains of Canada, the rock layers of the Burgess Shale preserved a fragment of that world. What is strange is that creatures that once drifted through the sea now lie silent in stone, high in the mountains, as though the ancient ocean had been folded up and hidden inside the earth. A soft body once swam through the water. A small creature once died in the mud. A predator once glided through shallow seas. All of them, through a rare chain of geological luck, were preserved long enough for humans much later to bend down brush dust from a slab of stone and realize they were looking at a dream more than 500 million years old. Fossils do not tell stories through sound. They do not let us hear the water or see the true colors of the creatures or know the final moment of each prey animal. But fossils preserve shape, and shape alone is enough for imagination to awaken. A circular mouth, a pair of spined appendages, a flattened swimming body with soft lobes along its sides. These details are like a few surviving pieces of a vast painting, forcing us to slowly assemble the rest in silence. Return once more to the Cambrian waters. You are hovering very low above the sea floor. A gentle current passes by, carrying tiny, glittering particles. A soft-bodied animal withdraws into a crack in the stone. A trilobite crawls past, leaving a faint trace in the mud. Farther away, another creature stretches out its tiny legs as if testing the world by touch. There is no music, no roar, none of the drama humans often attach to monsters. There is only the rhythm of primordial life, slow, patient, and yet, within it, a new tension has just been born. Then Anomalocaris appears. It does not need to reveal its entire body at once. At first, there is only a movement unlike the others. The water ahead of you shifts direction slightly. The creatures on the bottom seem to become quieter. A flattened shadow passes through the blue light. The two front appendages open like ancient hooks. Its eyes look into the water, not with cruelty, because nature does not need cruelty, but with the pure instinct of a body made to find food. Perhaps it catches the prey. Perhaps the prey escapes. That matters less than what the moment reveals a new ocean is taking shape. From this point forward, the sea will never again be only a place where life drifts passively. It will be a place where creatures chase one another, deceive one another, defend themselves against one another, grow stronger because of one another, and disappear because of one another. Fear in the ocean did not begin with a gigantic shark hundreds of millions of years later. It began smaller, stranger, older, in a shallow sea, where the first predator learned to swim through the light. The most frightening thing about the primordial sea is not that it is full of blood. It is frightening because it is unfamiliar. Here, living bodies are still searching for their own language. Eyes are a new and powerful invention. A shell is a small wall against death. Speed is a fragile promise. And predation is a transformation so deep that every surrounding species must respond to it. The Cambrian Ocean is like a dark room where life first realizes that something else may be coming closer. And if we listen very slowly, this story is not only about extinct creatures. It is also about a rule that remains in the world today. Every living creature carries within it the memory of escapes from a very ancient past. Every shell, every spine, every watchful pair of eyes, every quick movement through dark water is an echo of those first days. We look at the modern ocean and see fish, coral, sea turtles, sharks, and whales. But beneath all those familiar shapes lies a much older history, beginning in waters where Anomalocaris once glided like the first dark shadow. The first chapter of this journey then does not take us to the largest monster. It takes us to something deeper, the moment when the ocean began to fear itself. A small creature crawls across the mud. A predator passes overhead. A shell grows thicker through time. A pair of eyes opens in ancient water. From things that seem so small, the history of sea monsters begins. And as the Cambrian light slowly fades behind us, hold on to that image for a little longer. A primordial ocean, silent, dark blue, filled with strange bodies trying to live in their first world. No myth is written here because there are no humans yet to tell it. No names echo through the water because there is no language. But beneath those ancient waves, the sea has quietly created its first hunters, and from that moment, a great door in the history of life has opened. Ahead in the journey, the ocean will change many more times. Shallow waters will become more dangerous. Armored bodies will grow larger. Predators will discover more frightening ways to rule the world beneath the surface. But it does not begin with a roar. It begins with a silent shadow swimming through the primordial sea in an age when life first learned how to hunt. Let the current carry us a little farther away from the primordial sea, where the first predators had only just learned to swim through the darkness. Time does not pass in days or months, but in layers of stone stacked upon one another, in old seafloors buried beneath the earth, in creatures that disappear and leave only fragile shapes behind in the ground. The ocean is still ancient, but it is no longer as utterly unfamiliar as it was at the first dawn of life. The chases have become more familiar. The shells have grown thicker. Spines, eyes, crawling legs, armored bodies, and small jaws have begun to form a world with clearer rules beneath the surface. Every creature must find a way to eat, or a way not to be eaten. Now imagine that you are no longer drifting through an open expanse of dim blue water. You are in a shallow sea of the Silurian period, where light can still reach the bottom, where the surface above is not very far away, yet the feeling of safety almost does not exist. The water here is warmer, denser, filled with tiny particles of silt suspended like dust in a dark room. Below lies soft mud limestone patches of attached life and ancient reefs quietly growing. This is not the deep ocean that frightens human beings because the bottom cannot be seen. This is another kind of fear, the fear of shallow water, where you think you might be able to stand, yet beneath your feet things are crawling past. In this place, darkness does not come from depth. It comes from movement. A long streak glides across the mud. A slender tail trails behind. Jointed legs touch the seafloor, leaving the faintest marks. An armored body creeps through the low water, partly like a scorpion, partly like a creature born from an ancient nightmare. It is not a true scorpion like the kind that lives in deserts today, but the name sea scorpion may still make our imagination instantly understand what we are seeing. A long body, a hard outer shell, front appendages that could grasp prey, a tail ending in a pointed tip, and a silence that makes it even more frightening. They are called eurypterids. But in tonight's story, we may remember them by a simpler name, sea scorpions. They belong to the world of arthropods, that ancient extended family of creatures with hard outer shells and segmented legs. If you look closely, you will see that their bodies are not geoff masses of flesh drifting through the water. They are like living machines assembled from many small plates of armor, each plate in its own place, each joint with its own task. The head and front body carry the appendages. The rear body stretches into segments. And at the end is the tail, not necessarily venomous like that of modern scorpions, but enough to create a chilling image as it moves through the blue light underwater. What makes the shallow sea so frightening is that you can see danger approaching, but you cannot be sure you can avoid it. In the deep sea, fear often comes from things that do not reveal themselves. Here, fear crawls right before your eyes. It lies in the mud still as a piece of stone. It waits in the shadow of an ancient reef. It moves low and slow along the sea floor, as if it does not want to disturb the water above. Then when a small creature passes by, the front appendages can open. A touch, a moment, and the world of the prey ends not with an explosion, but with the closing of spined limbs. Picture a body of water only a few meters deep. The ancient sun falls through the waves, breaking into trembling streaks of light across the mud. Far away are clusters of attached organisms, like tiny underwater forests. There are soft-bodied creatures, hidden in shells, creatures crawling along the seafloor, and trilobites still continuing their slow lives like little shields that know how to move. For them, this world has become far more complex. There are no longer only predators swimming overhead. Now, danger can also appear at eye level, right on the bottom, from something that crawls, hides, and waits as patiently as they do. Not all sea scorpions were gigantic. Some were smaller, living as predators or scavengers in nearshore waters, quietly slipping through cracks in the rocks and layers of mud. But some evolutionary lines among them produced bodies so large that if placed beside a modern human being, the boundary between ancient animal and monster would feel very thin. Imagine an arthropod nearly as long as, or even longer, than an adult person covered in armor, with claws or front appendages used to seize prey crawling through murky water. It does not need to roar. It does not need to display its strength. The mere fact that a creature with such a form once truly existed is enough to make shallow water feel uneasy. Here, the frightening thing is not a violent attack like in a film. The frightening thing is its normality. For sea scorpions, predation is not a grand spectacle. It is part of everyday life in the ancient ocean. A small animal leaves its shelter. A layer of mud is stirred. A long shadow presses close to the bottom. Jointed legs move one beat at a time, steady, unhurried. Then in a very brief moment, the distance disappears. The water becomes still again. Tiny grains of silt continue to fall, as though nothing has happened. If the listener is lying in the dark, try to imagine yourself walking slowly across an ancient tidal flat. The water reaches only your knees. Above is the strange sky of an earth without birds, without human voices, without sails offshore. Beneath you is cold, soft mud, slippery stone, and traces of ancient algae. Each step clouds the water. You look down trying to guess what is rock and what is alive. Then a shape, longer than your arm, slips past, very close by. It does not flee like a small fish. It does not panic. It continues moving with the confidence of a creature that knows in this water it is the very thing that makes others move aside. The ancient ocean has no mercy, but it also has no malice. The sea scorpion is not a monster in the sense of knowing hatred, hunting out of cruelty, or spreading fear like a creature from myth. It simply lives. It is shaped by its environment, by millions of years of selection, by the silent race between hard bodies and soft bodies, between the slow and the fast, between those that see danger first and those caught by surprise. That is what gives its story more depth. The terror does not lie in cruelty, but in the fact that nature can create forms utterly alien to us, then place them in a world where every living thing must face every other. In the Silurian seas, ancient reefs begin to create more complex living spaces. The stone structures and attached organisms are not merely background scenery. They are hiding places, ambush points, places where prey tries to squeeze in and escape the eyes of predators. A sea scorpion may pass along the edge of a reef like a low shadow. Its appendages glide over the sea floor, sensing vibrations in the water. Perhaps it does not see the world as we do. Perhaps color matters less than movement, light pressure, and the faint chemical traces spreading through the water. But that only makes it feel more ancient, like an instinct given shape. When we look at eurypterid fossils today, we often see them lying still on slabs of stone, flat and silent, like shadows that have dried into rock. It is easy to forget that those outlines were once living bodies. The body segments once flexed slightly. The legs once touched mud. The appendages once opened and closed. The tail once trailed behind through cloudy water. Fossils make everything still, but that very stillness invites our imagination into what has been lost. Movement, water, color, light, the fear of prey, and the patience of the hunter. There is a very interesting detail when we think about sea scorpions. Many fossils may be parts of the outer shell that they shed, not always complete dead bodies. This makes them seem even more like ghosts of the ancient sea. A living creature grows. Its old armor becomes too tight. Then it leaves that shell behind, as though abandoning an older shape of itself. The empty shell lies on the seafloor, is covered by mud, compressed by time, and hundreds of millions of years later becomes a trace that allows humans to imagine a body that is no longer there. In the story of fossils, sometimes what remains is not the animal, but the shadow of a moment when it grew. The shallow water, then, is not only a dangerous place. It is a place where the boundary between life and death, between hiding and being caught, between growing and being left behind in the mud, happens very close together. A small creature may live one more day if it finds the right crack in the rocks. A sea scorpion may lose its chance if the prey buries itself too quickly in the mud. An old shell may drift away and leave nothing behind, or be buried at just the right moment to become a message sent into the future. Everything is fragile, but from that fragility, the history of life is written layer by layer. Listen to that sea for a little longer. There is no great sound of waves like on a modern shore, no cry of gulls, no wind passing through coastal forests because the land world is not yet green in the way it will be later. The sounds here, if they could be heard, would be very small, mud being stirred, shell touching stone water, sliding over armor, a soft body shrinking back into darkness. And among all those movements, the sea scorpion passes like a cold thought of the ocean. It does not rule the entire sea in an absolute sense. But in the moment, it appears the water around it seems to narrow. This is what makes the sea scorpion one of the perfect symbols of fear in the ancient ocean. It does not belong purely to imagination. It is not a sea monster told beside a fire, not a creature woven by humans out of darkness. It is a real organism known through fossils, one that once lived, moved, hunted, molted, and vanished. Yet its form comes strangely close to myth. A giant arthropod bearing the shape of a scorpion living in water, crawling across an ancient sea floor. Simply telling that truth is enough to make the listener feel a chill at the back of the neck. And perhaps the most haunting thing is that shallow water is usually tied to the feeling of safety. When we think of a dangerous sea, we often imagine the abyss, the dark bottom, the place where light cannot reach. But in the age of sea scorpions, it was the shoreline waters, where light still remained, where the bottom was still near, where a creature could crawl, hide, and ambush, that became the stage of fear. There is no need for a black, endless ocean. All it takes is a muddy spit of ground, an ancient reef, a streak of cloudy water, and an armored body lying motionless like stone. If we could look down on this sea from above, we would not see a chaotic world. We would see an ancient order, small prey following familiar routes, predators waiting where currents carry food past them, hard-shelled creatures slipping between reef patches, faint tracks in the mud slowly erased by the water. The sea scorpion is only one part of that order, but it is the part that gives the order teeth, claws, armor, and shadow. As time passes, the oceans will go on to create many other predators, larger, faster, with stronger jaws, and with bodies more familiar to the modern human eye. But sea scorpions hold a very particular place in this story. They belong to a stage when the sea still carried a raw, ancient, almost pre-mythic quality. They remind us that before sharks, before marine reptiles, before the famous names that fascinate popular culture, there were armored creatures crawling through shallow waters and turning the seafloor into a place that demanded caution. Let that image settle slowly, an ancient afternoon beneath the waterlight, slanting through shallow waves, soft mud covering the bottom, small creatures searching for paths among the reefs. Then from a cloudy patch, a sea scorpion appears. Its armor catches the light faintly. Its tail stretches behind it. Jointed legs lift the body from the mud. It does not hurry. It does not need to hurry. In that water, its presence alone is enough to make every other creature change the way it moves. And as we leave this shallow sea, what remains is not a violent hunting scene, but the feeling that the ancient ocean has stepped into a new level. Fear no longer comes only from strange shapes swimming through open water. It has crawled down to the seafloor. It has learned to hide in mud. It has taken on armor claws, a tail, and the patience of an ambush predator. The sea is no longer only an unfamiliar place. It has become a low, murky, warm maze filled with living things pressed close against death. But time continues to flow across the sea floor. Armor will not be the final limit of fear. Ahead, the ocean is preparing to create something else more direct, more powerful, and frightening in a way that feels closer to our imagination. Not claws, not jointed legs, not pointed tails, but jaws. When jaws truly move into the center of the hunt, the sea will change its voice again. And in the darkness of the Devonian period, another armored predator is waiting to appear. Let the current carry us away from the shallow waters, filled with the armored shadows of sea scorpions, drifting farther forward through the very long history of the ocean. Time flows again like a river without banks. Old seas are buried. Creatures that once crawled through mud become faint impressions in stone. Layers of ancient seafloor rise, crack open, and then rest beneath the light of later continents. And within that immense darkness underwater, life continues to change. It does not stop at claws at jointed legs or at outer shells hardened like armor. The ocean begins to create something more direct, deeper, and for prey, far more terrifying jaws. Now we are in the Devonian period, an age often called the Age of Fishes. But do not picture small silver schools of fish glittering as they do in the modern sea. The Devonian Sea is another world, older, rougher, and somewhat heavier. Beneath the surface, many vertebrates are experimenting with new forms. Some carry armor, some have strange fins, some are beginning to move closer to the kinds of bodies that, hundreds of millions of years later, will lead to fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and eventually human beings. But in that sea, if there is one name that makes us pause, it is Dunkleosteus. Imagine yourself suspended in a shallow sea over the region that is now Ohio near Cleveland. But at that time, there is no city, no streets, no lights, no sound of cars moving by the lake. There is only water covering part of an ancient continent, dim light falling onto the mud, and Devonian creatures drifting through their world. The air above does not belong to us. The shoreline carries no human footprints. On land, life is still trying to learn how to stand firmly. But beneath the water, an armored predator is moving like a shaped mass of darkness. Dunkleosteus is not like a shark. It is not like a whale, nor like any marine predator that the modern human eye is used to seeing. Its head and the front part of its body are covered with large plates of bone like an ancient helmet. Instead of true teeth, it has sharp bony plates in its jaws, working like blades. When the mouth opens and closes, those bony edges can sharpen themselves through movement, making the jaw not merely a feeding organ, but almost a cutting machine of nature. What makes Dunkleosteus frightening is not only its size. In fact, this is where we need to look at it with more accurate eyes. For many years, popular imagination turned Dunkleosteus into an almost unbelievable, gigantic monster. But more recent studies are more cautious, suggesting that typical adults may have been a little over 3 meters long, while the largest individuals may have reached a little over 4 meters. At first, that number may sound smaller than what many people once imagined, but slow down for a moment. Imagine a thick, short, deep, heavy body, armored in front, with a large head and a mouth that could open like a door made of bone. The terror of Dunkleosteus does not lie in being as long as a ship. It lies in the fact that its entire body feels like a compressed mass of strength. In the Devonian waters, a creature like this does not need to chase prey for very long to create a sense of dominance. Its presence alone changes the space around it. Smaller fish must turn away. Creatures with shells or armor are no longer completely safe. Prey that once relied on hard outer protection now has to face something equally hard, equally ancient, but with one terrifying advantage: a jaw that can close with enough force to make defense meaningless. Picture a deep afternoon beneath the Devonian Sea. The light from the surface is no longer bright. Water silt and time soften it into a gray-blue haze. The seafloor lies still, but it is not dead. Small creatures crawl through the mud. A few ancient fish glide across the open water. Farther away are coiled shells, soft bodies, and shapes we now know only through fossils. Everything seems to be living through the ordinary rhythm of a day, without calendars, without hours, without memory. Then, from the murky water, a larger shape appears. At first, you may see only the head. A heavy, dark mass, not soft, not flexible, in the way modern fish often move. It is like a mask of bone drifting through the water. The armor plates over its head and neck catch the light faintly. The body behind it may have been softer and is less clearly known from fossils, but the front is so unmistakable that a single glance is enough to understand why it became an icon of the Devonian Sea. This is an animal in which nature placed power at the front, as if its entire story began and ended with the jaw. Dunkleosteus does not approach with anger. Nature does not need anger. It moves because it is hungry, because of instinct, because its body was made to do this. When prey comes close enough, the jaw can open very quickly. Not the slow opening of a heavy door, but a sudden movement that creates suction in the water, drawing prey toward the mouth. In that moment, the line between safe distance and death becomes extremely thin. A creature may be swimming normally, and then in the blink of an eye, the water around it changes, and the armored shadow in front of it has become its entire world. This is what makes Dunkleosteus different from the fears that came before it. Sea scorpions suggested ambush close to the bottom armor, and claws moving through shallow water. Dunkleosteus is the fear of the mouth. It turns the jaw into the center of the ocean. With it, the hunt does not need claws' teeth as long as daggers or a body that coils like a sea serpent. All it needs are two sharp bony plates, a skull with a special mechanism, and a bite strong enough to remind every other creature that armor does not always save a life. If we could hear that moment underwater, it might not sound like a roar. Sound would be swallowed by the water, becoming a heavy, short, muffled impact, like stone striking stone in a distant room. Then the mud on the bottom settles again. The current continues to flow. The prey is gone. Dunkleosteus keeps swimming unhurried, unshowy, as if what just happened were only a breath in the long day of the ocean. But to understand the full terror of Dunkleosteus, we must also understand the world that created it. The Devonian is not only the age of one giant, armored fish. It is an age when the sea is becoming richer in form, more competitive, and more complex. Jawed fish are beginning to play a more important role. Creatures that defend themselves with shell's armor speed, or hidden ways of life, must constantly adapt. In that world, Dunkleosteus is not a strange mistake, not a lone nightmare. It is nature's answer to an ocean where predation has become an increasingly refined art. There is a cold beauty in the way its body is built. The armor plates are not merely decoration. They protect the most important part of the body, the head, the neck, the front of the torso where the attack happens. The jaw has no true teeth, yet it is sharp and powerful. The mechanism of opening the mouth is not as simple as we might imagine. It is a system of movement that helps the head and jaw work together in a brief moment. When we look at the fossil, we see only bone. But if we imagine those bones once bearing muscle, once pulled by living force, Once opening in murky water, the fossil no longer feels dead. It becomes the surviving blueprint of a predator that once made an entire stretch of sea cautious. Dunkleosteus fossils create a very particular feeling. They are not soft. They are not fragile like the imprint of a leaf in stone. They are heavy, large, clear, like broken pieces of a warrior's helmet raised from an ancient sea floor. When humans find those armor plates in Devonian rock, they are not merely finding a lost species of fish. They are finding proof that before sea monsters existed in the imagination, the ocean had already created a real creature with the appearance of a battle machine. Try to think of a prey animal in that world. Perhaps it has a shell. Perhaps it has a hard outer layer. Perhaps for many generations, its ancestors survived by becoming harder to eat, harder to bite, harder to swallow. But then, a predator like Dunkleosteus appears, and suddenly that strategy is no longer certain. This is an important part of the story of evolution. Every new layer of defense invites a new form of attack. Every thick plate of armor asks the predator a question. How can it be broken? And in the Devonian Sea, one of the most frightening answers is this armored jaw. Even so, we should not turn Dunkleosteus into a limitless monster. It is not a supernatural creature, not an all-powerful ruler of every ocean. It is a real animal living in real environments, bound by its body, its energy, its food, its lifespan, and the conditions of its age. It could also be injured. It also had to find prey. It was also part of the web of life, not standing outside it. That truth makes it more compelling. Because a creature does not need to be immortal to be frightening. It only needs to be real enough for us to know that at some point in Earth's history, if we had fallen into that sea, we would not have had a chance to understand what was coming. Perhaps the most haunting thing is the silence between hunts. A Dunkleosteus is not always attacking. Most of the time, it may simply swim through the water like other creatures. But its presence gives the ocean a different meaning. Just as in a forest, knowing that a large predator is nearby makes every rustle of leaves and every small movement more noticeable in the Devonian Sea. The presence of Dunkleosteus turns every murky stretch of water, every shadow beneath the surface, every distant movement into a possible sign of danger. If you are listening to this story at night, imagine turning off all the lights in your room, leaving only a soft darkness around you. Now replace that darkness with water. Replace the floor with a muddy sea floor. Replace the wind outside the window with a slow current moving past your ears. And somewhere ahead, in that gray-blue haze, an armored mass is approaching. You cannot hear it clearly. You do not know exactly how large it is. But you see the broad head, the mouth that can open the bony plates like ancient blades. Then you will understand why the Devonian Ocean did not need mythical sea monsters. It had Dunkleosteus. What makes this creature an icon is not only its fierce appearance, it also represents an important stage in the history of the ocean, the moment when the power of Jaws began to change the rules of the hunt. Before it, the sea already had predation, ambush armor, and claws. But with Dunkleosteus, we see another kind of dominance, one focused on bite force skull mechanics, and the ability to turn a moment of contact into an ending. From this point on, the story of sea monsters will no longer be only a story of strange shapes. It will increasingly become a story of strength, speed, size, and ever more effective ways of hunting. In the stone of today, Dunkleosteus lies still, like a lost king of the Devonian Sea. No current passes over its gills anymore. No prey hides from its shadow. No gray-blue light slides across the armor plates of its head. But whenever we stand before that fossil imagination does something that time cannot prevent. It places the bones back into the water. It adds current mud light and movement. It makes the jaw open one more time, not to hunt, but to remind us that the ocean once had other ages, other rules, and other fears. And as this chapter slowly comes to a close, hold that image in your mind, an ancient Devonian sea, quiet on the surface but tense beneath, an armored creature swimming through murky water, a jaw without teeth yet sharp as blades, a body that does not need to be mythically long, but is strong enough, strange enough, and real enough to become one of the most terrifying icons of the ancient ocean. Dunkleosteus is not merely an extinct fish. It is the moment when the sea learned to place its power in the jaw. And from that moment, the world beneath the surface was never innocent in the same way again. But time does not stop in the Devonian. Although Dunkleosteus was once one of the greatest dark shadows of its sea, even it could not remain forever. Oceans change. Ecosystems collapse and are reborn. Predators vanish, allowing other lineages to step into the empty space of power. And ahead, after the great upheavals of Earth, the sea will prepare for a new dynasty, one where there are no longer only armored fish and bony jaws, but giant reptiles beginning to take possession of the ocean. Imagine you are diving through a sea after the apocalypse of ancient Earth. Not an apocalypse in one fiery instant, the way human imagination often paints it, but a slower kind of apocalypse, quieter, more silent, and for that reason, even more terrifying. Where life once crowded together, there is now only dark mud and an impoverished seafloor. Where creatures once crawled, swam hid, and hunted one another. The current now passes through, as if moving through an abandoned house. Around 252 million years ago, at the end of the Permian period, Earth entered the greatest biological crisis the planet had ever witnessed. The oceans were almost emptied. Countless marine species disappeared, not like characters leaving a story, but like an entire language erased from the world. The forms once familiar to the sea were gone. The old predators, the old prey, the old seafloor communities, all of them were drawn into a silence that would last for millions of years. And it was within that silence that a new question began to form. When an ocean loses almost all of those that once ruled it, who will step into the space left behind? When the thrones beneath the water are left empty, what shape will life choose in order to return? The answer does not come immediately. It does not appear like a monster rising from the abyss. It begins more slowly from reptilian bodies that once belonged to the edge of the land, from air-breathing creatures increasingly drawn toward the sea. At first, they do not look like the new kings of the ocean. They are only survivors, small bodies trying to step into the water, trying to swim, trying to hunt, trying to exist in a world that has just been devastated. But across a very long span of time, the sea will reshape them. Legs will become fins, bodies will grow longer, tails will become stronger, eyes will learn to see in deeper water. And from those humble first steps, a new dynasty will appear. After the great extinction, the ocean does not become gentler. It is only waiting for the next predators. The ocean after the Permian extinction is like a vast room after the final voice has gone quiet. Life still remains, but it is no longer as abundant as before. The survivors must enter a wounded world. The lineages that remain must not only continue to exist, They must find ways to fill the enormous gaps the disaster has left behind. And it is within those gaps that a new chapter of the sea begins. This time, those who enter the ocean are not armored fish like Dunkleosteus. They are not armored arthropods like sea scorpions. They come from another direction from the land. In the millions of years after the great extinction, some reptile lineages begin to return to the water. Their ancestors once lived on land, breathed air, and moved on legs across the ground. But the sea, though it has just passed through catastrophe, is still an enormous invitation. In the water, there is space, there is food, there are ecological niches left vacant. And while life on land is still recovering, the ocean opens like an abandoned kingdom, waiting for new creatures, adapted enough to enter. Imagine an ancient shoreline in a gray morning. There are no birds in the sky, no soft green grass underfoot, no dense coastal forest like the ones we often imagine in later ages. There is only mudstone, shallow water, and surviving creatures silently searching for their way. At the edge of the water, a small reptile quietly moves down. At first, it is not a monster. It is not a ruler. It is only a body trying a new way of life. But nature often begins great changes with small steps like these. Across many generations, those bodies slowly transform. Legs become better suited to pushing through water. Bodies grow longer, more streamlined. Tails become stronger. Swimming ability improves. A creature that once belonged to the land begins to be reshaped by the sea. And then after enough time, the descendants of those reptile lineages no longer resemble newcomers stepping into water. They have become creatures of the ocean. Among them, ichthyosaurs are one of the strangest and most beautiful images. At a glance, you might mistake them for dolphins. They have streamlined bodies, long snouts, fins, and forms made to glide through open water. But they are not dolphins. They are not mammals. They are marine reptiles, a branch of life that returned to the ocean and was remade by it so completely that their shape became close to the fast-swimming creatures of the modern age. Let yourself drift into an ancient Triassic sea where light falls through clearer water, and in the distance, a long shadow glides past. The ichthyosaur does not crawl along the bottom like a sea scorpion. It is not heavy like the armored jaw of Dunkleosteus. It is motion. It is speed. It is the shape of a body that has learned to turn water into a road. When an ichthyosaur swims past, you do not feel the surface of the water being torn open. You only see a soft curve, a flick of the tail, a body moving so naturally that it is difficult to believe its distant ancestors once lived on land. This is a new kind of fear in the ancient ocean. Not the fear of heavy armor or large claws, but the fear of perfect adaptation. The more a predator blends into its environment, the harder it is to separate from the darkness around it. Some ichthyosaurs are small, others are much larger. One of the most striking images known today comes from Nevada, where in the middle of a hot, dry desert, traces of ichthyosaurs were found from an ancient sea about 230 million years ago. The skeletons of Shonosaurus lie in the rock like an oceanic graveyard lifted out of the water, reminding us that the place now dry land once held the shadows of giant reptiles swimming through it. Let us pause with that image for a moment. A modern desert. Rock, sun, wind, dryness. But inside the stone, there is the memory of the sea. Creatures once swam there, once rose to breathe, once hunted, once gave birth, once died, and settled onto the bottom. The ancient ocean has not completely disappeared. It has only changed its form, becoming mountains, desert layers of stone, where bones lie silent, waiting to be found. But ichthyosaurs are not the only ones to enter the sea after the great extinction. As time moves deeper into the Jurassic period, another group of marine reptiles begins to become an icon of ancient waters, plesiosaurs. They have an appearance that seems almost unreasonable to the modern eye. A broad body, 4 large flippers, a long neck, a small head. If an ichthyosaur is like an arrow gliding through water, then a plesiosaur is a quieter, more dreamlike shadow, as though the sea has tried to create an animal that is both graceful and frightening. Imagine a Jurassic sea at the end of the day. The light on the surface has softened. Below, tiny particles drift in the dark blue water. From far away, a plesiosaur appears, not rushing forward like a spear, but moving with 4 large flippers, almost as if it is flying slowly through the water. Its long neck reaches forward, its small head turning gently, searching for the movement of fish or smaller creatures. It does not need a gigantic head to make the viewer uneasy. It is the length, the slenderness, and the strangeness of its neck that make it seem to step out from the boundary between fossil and legend. But we must speak of them carefully. Plesiosaurs are not dinosaurs, even though they lived during the same age as dinosaurs. They are marine reptiles, a separate group within the Mesozoic world. This matters because the ocean, at that time, was not merely an extension of the age of dinosaurs. It had its own dynasty, its own predators, its own evolutionary dramas, and its own fears. On land, dinosaurs could walk across plains and ancient forests. But beneath the water, other creatures were writing a parallel history. In the sea, the 4 flippers of a plesiosaur are not only a strange detail. They are the body's solution to the problem of moving through water. Unlike fish that beat their tails in a familiar rhythm, plesiosaurs use their large flippers to push the body forward, creating the feeling of an animal rowing through the sea with enormous arms. That movement may seem slower in our imagination, but it is not weak. It allows a large body to move between layers of water, change direction, approach prey, then vanish again into the gray-blue. And then, in that same vast world, there is a more frightening variation of this group pliosaurs. If the long-necked plesiosaur evokes a dreamlike feeling, the pliosaur feels much more direct and heavy. Short neck, large head, powerful jaws, big teeth, streamlined body, 4 strong flippers. It is like the ocean's answer to the question, what if a marine reptile did not need a long neck to hunt, but concentrated its power in the head and jaws instead? Imagine the water becoming darker. A large fish is swimming past, silent, in the deep blue. There is no warning sound, no long-necked shadow slowly approaching from a distance. Instead, from below or behind, a large head appears. The jaws open. Teeth appear for a moment. 4 flippers drive the body forward. A pliosaur does not have the delicate grace of a long-necked plesiosaur. It has the beauty of focused power of a body designed to close in and bite. This is the moment when the ocean, after the great extinction, truly changes its voice. It does not merely recover, it recreates fear. From seas that were almost empty after catastrophe, life has arrived at fast swimmers like ichthyosaurs, strange and dreamlike forms like plesiosaurs, and large-jawed predators like pliosaurs. Each group carries a different way of taking possession of the sea. One uses speed and a streamlined body. One uses 4 flippers and a strange neck. One uses a large head and bite force. The ocean does not choose one single form for power. It tests many forms, then lets time decide which ones can endure. What is even more frightening is that these marine reptiles still have to surface to breathe. They are not fish. They cannot remain underwater forever. In the rhythm of their lives, there is always a moment when they must leave the darkness and touch the air. Imagine the nighttime surface of a Triassic or Jurassic sea flat, and still beneath a sky that has never known city lights. A large shadow rises. A breath breaks the surface. Then that body sinks back down, returning the sea to its original stillness. Only one widening ring of water remains, then disappears. That moment makes them feel closer and also more haunting. They are not invisible monsters living completely beyond our understanding. They are real animals with lungs, with a need to breathe, with young, with life cycles, with limits. But within those very limits, they still become rulers of the ocean. They need no magic, no legend, only a body adapted enough, an environment wide enough, and millions of years long enough. If you are listening in the night, imagine lying still and the entire room around you becoming a dark sea. Above is cold air. Below is deep water, where ancient reptilian shadows are moving. Some glide quickly like living arrows. Some swim more slowly, long necks reaching through the water. Some have large heads and heavy jaws drifting through the darkness like dangerous thoughts of the ocean. You do not need to see them all. Simply knowing they are there beneath the surface is enough to give the silence weight. And that is the very important point of this chapter. After the great extinction, the sea does not become gentler. It is not cleansed into a safe world. On the contrary, catastrophe opens empty spaces, and empty spaces are where evolution can create new creatures. Ecosystems lose many of their old parts, but life does not stop in mourning. It returns, slowly, patiently. Then it becomes more frightening than before in entirely new ways. We may often think of extinction as a full stop, but in the history of Earth, extinction is also a doorway. It closes one world, but at the same time opens space for another. The predators of the Devonian are gone. The Permian marine communities have collapsed. But from those biological ashes, marine reptiles step down into the water and turn the Mesozoic ocean into the stage of a new dynasty. Look back at the journey we have just taken in this chapter, as if it were a long dream underwater. First came the silence after disaster, an ocean almost empty, where the life that remained had to begin again from fragments. Then came the first reptilian bodies, finding their way into the water, awkward, small, not yet bearing the majesty of the rulers that would come later. Then ichthyosaurs appeared fast and streamlined, like ancient dolphin shadows, but belonging to another bloodline. Plesiosaurs swam into the story with long necks and four flippers, both strange and graceful. And pliosaurs brought back the darkness of large jaws, reminding us that in the ocean, beauty and danger often swim very close together. This chapter is not the story of a single monster. It is the story of a transfer of power. The ocean once belonged to other predators, but after the catastrophe, the underwater throne was left empty. And marine reptiles creatures, whose ancestors had once lived on land, stepped into that space. They did not merely live in the sea, they allowed the sea to remake them. They became the long shadows of a new age, where the surface was no longer the boundary between land and ocean, but the doorway into another kingdom. Now, as the light of the Jurassic slowly fades in our imagination, hold on to one final image, an ancient sea lying flat beneath a dark sky, seemingly peaceful. Then a breath rises very softly. A large back appears wet beneath at the starlight. A gigantic reptilian body surfaces for only a moment, then sinks again into the deep black. On the surface, a ring of water expands, grows smaller, and disappears. But beneath it, the dynasty of marine reptiles is still moving. And ahead in the journey, as the seas change shape once more, the ocean will no longer be only a place of isolated hunting shadows. It will become a broader battlefield where giant fish, marine reptiles, and other predators share a world full of tension beneath ancient waves. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a vast plain in North America today. Perhaps it is Kansas, where the wind blows across dry fields, where the land stretches beneath an open sky, where it is easy to think that the sea is very far away. There is no sound of waves, no scent of salt, no shadow of a large fish gliding beneath you. There is only earth, stone, grass, dust, and a horizon so long it seems never to end. But if you bend down, if you place your hand upon those white layers of rock and listen with your imagination, the ground itself will begin to change its voice. Because this place was once the bottom of the sea, not a small lake forgotten by time, not a shallow marsh that appeared briefly during a few ancient rainy seasons. During the Cretaceous period, a vast sea once flooded into the heart of North America, stretching like a gigantic blue wound between two landmasses. It was called the Western Interior Seaway. If you stood where the central plains of the United States lie today, you would not see cattle towns or roads crossing the prairie. You would see water, a great deal of water, a shallow, warm, wide sea filled with light, yet beneath that glittering surface was a world so densely packed with predators that it would be difficult to call it peaceful. In the previous chapters, the ocean has taught us many kinds of fear. The primordial sea frightened us because it was so unfamiliar. The shallow waters of the sea scorpions frightened us because danger could crawl along the bottom, right beneath our feet. Dunkleosteus frightened us with the armored jaw of the Devonian. Then, after the Great Extinction, marine reptiles entered the water and turned the Mesozoic ocean into a new kingdom. But by the Cretaceous period, fear was no longer concentrated in a single creature. It became an entire ecosystem, a many-layered battlefield where, above the water, within the water, and down on the seafloor, there were hunters waiting for their own chance. Let yourself drift down into that inland sea on an ancient morning. The surface above reflects the wide sky, but it is far from empty. Pterosaurs glide overhead, their great wings passing through the sea wind, their eyes watching the surface for fish. Beneath the thin layer of waves, schools of small fish turn like clouds of silver dust. Farther away, ammonites coil within their spiral shells, drifting silently through the water, shaped like the ancient clocks of the sea. Sea turtles swim slowly through the warm water. Smaller creatures filter food, hide in the mud, cling to the bottom, or become part of a chain of predation longer than they can understand. The deeper you go, the more the scene loses its first appearance of gentleness. Light can still reach down, but it is stirred by silt plankton and constant motion. This is a shallow sea, but it is not simple. It is like a great road connecting bodies of water where creatures from many ecological layers meet one another. One fish may hunt a smaller fish, then become the target of something larger. A turtle may move slowly across open water, while somewhere behind it, a long reptilian body changes direction. An ammonite may seal itself inside its spiral shell, but even then it is not entirely safe from jaws that can crush, bite, or pull it from that ancient protection. In this world, mosasaurs are shadows that cannot be ignored. They are not dinosaurs, even though they lived at the same time as the dinosaurs on land. They are marine reptiles, distant relatives of lizards and snakes in the broader evolutionary sense, but their bodies have been transformed by the sea until they have become predators completely at home in the water. Long bodies, powerful tails, large jaws, sharp teeth. They move through the ocean like gigantic lizards that have forgotten the land. Perhaps they do not swim exactly like sharks in every detail, but in the listener's imagination, the way they take possession of the water still gives a similar feeling. A long line of body, a sweep of the tail, a head directed straight toward the prey. Imagine a mosasaur swimming beneath gray-blue water. It does not need to appear directly before your eyes. At first, there is only a change in the behavior of smaller creatures. A school of fish splits apart. A turtle turns more slowly than it should. Larger fish that were hunting suddenly become cautious. Then, from the distance, a long line of shadow appears. There is no roar beneath the water, no warning music like in a film. Only a large body coming closer, becoming clearer and clearer, like a dangerous thought taking shape in the heart of the sea. One of the most striking representatives of ancient Kansas waters was Tylosaurus. The name alone carries the feeling of a creature from before humanity. Tylosaurus was a large mosasaur with a long body and a powerful snout, once swimming in the inland sea where there is land today. If you see a fossil specimen dozens of feet long in a museum, the first thing that may come is not fear, but silence. Because that skeleton reminds you that beneath today's dry fields, there was once a marine predator so large that even the space around it seemed to make room. But what makes the Cretaceous battlefield frightening is not only the mosasaur. If this place had only one apex predator, the story would be simpler. But the inland sea was an overlapping web. In these waters, giant fish also hunted with their own ferocity. And among those names, Zephactinus is one of the most unforgettable images. It was a bony fish, not a marine reptile, but its shape and hunting style made it feel like a nightmare with fins. Picture a fish far longer than a human body with a wide jaw, sharp teeth, a streamlined body swimming through bright water. Zephactinus does not need the dreamlike strangeness of a long-necked plesiosaur or the solemn grandeur of a mosasaur to become frightening. It is frightening because it is closer to the image of a fish that we know, but pushed into something much more brutal. A large predatory fish capable of swallowing very significant prey rushing through the inland sea with the hunger of a body that always needs energy. The famous fish within a fish fossil, in which a smaller fish lies inside the skeleton of Zephactinus, feels like a hunting moment, frozen into stone. It is not legend. It is a very slow photograph of death stretched across tens of millions of years. Pause with that image. A large fish swallowing another fish. That moment should have vanished after only a few hours digested, torn apart, erased by the current. But through a rare chain of accidents, it was preserved. The prey lay inside the body of the predator. Both sank to the bottom. Mud and minerals covered them. Time passed. The sea withdrew. Stone formed. And then, on a day far in the future, humans found inside the earth a scene from the final meal of a Cretaceous creature. No further exaggeration is needed. That truth alone is enough to make this sea feel vivid and cold. In that battlefield beneath the waves, life does not move in a simple line from weak to strong. There are layers of predation stacked upon one another. A small fish eats something smaller. A Zephactinus may swallow that fish. A mosasaur may hunt large fish, sea turtles, ammonites, or other creatures, depending on the species and the opportunity. Ancient sharks, such as Cretaceous, also appear in Cretaceous seas, gliding through the water with a more familiar body shape, but no less formidable. Above the surface, pterosaurs may dive down to catch fish. On the bottom, dead bodies attract scavengers and create another cycle of life. The entire sea is like a city of predators, where every road can lead to a jaw. What is special is that this inland sea was not some distant ocean at the edge of the world. It lay in the middle of a continent. That makes it closer to the imagination. Places where highways, towns, schools, fields, and farms exist today once held giant fish sea turtles, ammonites, sharks, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs. When we look at a silent plain, we often assume that the ground has always belonged to land. But geology tells another story. Land may once have been seafloor. Today's dry sky may once have been reflected on salt water. A white stone lying beside a road may carry the memory of plankton, tiny shells, or a vanished sea. Let the story slow down for a moment. You are drifting through water, not too deep, but far enough from the surface that the light has become blue and thin. Above you, the shadow of a pterosaur passes over the water like an ancient kite. Beneath you, an ammonite turns gently in the current. To your left, a school of small fish changes direction, all at once, their silver bodies flashing and then vanishing. To your right, a sea turtle swims with slow strokes, as if it does not belong to the hurry around it. For one moment, everything seems almost peaceful. Then the battlefield wakes. A sea factinus surges upward from the lower water. The school of fish breaks apart in many directions. One slower fish is caught in the opening jaw. The attack happens so quickly that if you blink, all you see afterward is mud and disturbed flecks of light. But that movement itself attracts the attention of larger hunters. Farther away, a mosasaur changes direction. It does not need to know the story of the small fish. It only senses opportunity movement, scent vibration in the water. In the ocean, every hunt can become an invitation to another hunt. This is why this chapter should be understood as a battlefield, but not a battlefield of anger or hatred. No general gives orders. No flag flies. No war drum sounds. There are only living creatures following their instincts within a dense ecosystem. Each species is a strategy. A spiral shell is a strategy. Speed is a strategy. Size is a strategy. A wide jaw is a strategy. Diving deeper, swimming faster, hiding, better surfacing, at the right moment. All of these are small ways to live one more day. At a deeper layer of the story, the Cretaceous inland sea also shows us the fragility of the world. In its time, this sea may have seemed like a permanent reality to the creatures living within it. Water stretched across the continent. Ecosystems flourished. Predators ruled. Prey adapted. Millions of years passed long enough for everything to seem as if it had the right to exist forever. But then the sea withdrew. The seafloor became land. Bones became fossils. The mosasaurs, Zephactinus ammonites, and ancient sea turtles disappeared from life, leaving only fragments of evidence lying silent beneath human feet. There is something very quiet in that disappearance. A sea once filled with motion is now a plain. A battlefield once crowded with swimming, biting, and fleeing now has no sound of water. If a person crosses Kansas on an afternoon today, they may hear only wind moving over grass. But beneath that wind, the strata still hold another layer of sound, far older. The water of the Cretaceous sea fins cutting through the current, jaws closing. A large body sinking to the bottom after a final meal. And when we think about ancient monsters beneath the ocean, perhaps this is one of the most frightening things. Not simply which creature was largest, longest, or had the strongest bite, but the fact that an entire world like this once existed in a place we now think of as ordinary. The ground beneath our feet is not as fixed as we imagine. It was once sea. The sea was once a battlefield. The battlefield was once filled with real living bodies, truly hungry, truly afraid, truly dying. And then time covered all of it with a layer of silence. Return to those waters one last time before we leave this chapter. The sun is setting over the inland sea. Pale golden light falls through the surface, turning particles of silt into glowing dust. An ammonite drifts slowly through still water. A school of fish changes direction like a small cloud. From far away, the long body of Tylosaurus glides through the darkness, unhurried, silent, carrying the confidence of a large predator. Below, Xiphactinus is still swimming, its wide jaw opening and closing in the fierce rhythm of the sea. Above, the shadow of a pterosaur crosses the fading sun. In those few minutes of imagination, we can feel the entire sea as one gigantic living body. Each animal is a heartbeat. Each hunt is a breath. Each future fossil is a memory waiting to be buried. And in the middle of it all, the Cretaceous inland sea continues to spread out warm, shallow, bright, but never truly safe. Then time continues again. The ancient waves withdraw from the continent. Layers of mud turn to stone. Skeletons lie silent in the darkness of the strata. The dynasty of these creatures, like every dynasty before it, will come to its limit. But the ocean has not finished its story of giant predators. As marine reptiles slowly vanish from the stage of evolution, another lineage warm-blooded and closer to the world we know today will begin to rewrite fear beneath the water in its own way. And this time, the terror will no longer come from sea lizards or giant fish. It will come from whales. After the inland seas of the Cretaceous slowly withdrew from the continents, the world beneath the surface entered another age of transformation. The long shadows of mosasaurs no longer glided through the ancient sea. The giant fish that had once turned shallow waters into battlefields had also retreated into the deep layers of fossil history. Once again, the ocean was like a stage after the old actors had departed. The surface still moved, waves still broke upon new shorelines, currents still carried life. But the old dynasty of predators had come to an end, and a quiet question began to echo beneath the waves who would step into this empty space. The answer, if we listen with modern imagination, may surprise us. For these new creatures were not armored fish. They were not sea scorpions. They were not giant reptiles with long jaws and bodies winding through ancient waters. They were the distant ancestors of a group of beings that many people today tend to imagine with far more gentleness: whales. When we speak of whales today, peaceful images often rise in the mind. A humpback whale surfacing in the blue sea, a long, deep song carrying through the ocean, a great tail lifting above the water, then slowly disappearing. Giant beings that filter food, migrate across thousands of kilometers, and carry the nearly sacred stillness of the sea. But if we see whales only through that modern image, we miss a very different chapter in their history. There were times when whales were not only the gentle giants of the deep. There were times when whales were predators. Imagine an Eocene shoreline more than 30 million years ago. The world has changed greatly since the age of mosasaurs, yet it is still not the world we know. Warm seas stretch across lands that today have become deserts, valleys, rocky hills, and dry plains. In what is now Egypt, there is a place called Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of Whales. Today, it is a dry landscape of sand and stone. But inside that stone lies the memory of an ancient sea, where early whales once swam, hunted, lived, and died, leaving their bones behind like ancient lines of writing from the ocean. In that sea, Basilosaurus appears as a long shadow, unlike any modern whale. Its name sounds like that of a reptile because at first, people once mistook it for a lizard-like creature. But Basilosaurus was not a reptile. It was an ancient whale, one of the notable representatives of the Archaeocetes, meaning ancient whales. Its body was long and narrow, almost more like a giant sea serpent than a blue whale or sperm whale as we know them. As it swam, we might imagine that long body bending rhythmically through the water, not quite like a modern whale, not quite like a fish, but like a strange evolutionary experiment in turning a mammal into a creature of the sea. Basilosaurus could reach about 15 to 18 meters in length, but what made it frightening was not only its length, it was its shape. A body stretched out like a shadow, jaws armed with sharp teeth, moving through the warm waters of the Eocene, among small fish, large fish turtles, other ancient whales and creatures living in an ocean after the age of marine reptiles. If a smaller creature saw Basilosaurus from a distance, perhaps it would not immediately see a whale. It would see a very long dark line approaching a body too large to ignore, yet too strange to understand. Dive down into that sea. The water above is bright and warm. Below you is a soft seafloor where the bones of dead creatures can be covered by mud and preserved for the future. Dorudon, a smaller kind of ancient whale, moves through the water like a slender shadow. They too are ancient whales, belonging to the same Eocene world, but far smaller than Basilosaurus. A young one may follow its mother through the warm water, unaware that in this very sea there is a predator that may see it as prey. We do not need to imagine too far. Fossil studies have found evidence within the body region of Basilosaurus, including bones of large fish and juvenile Dorudon, along with bite marks consistent with predatory behavior. This makes the image of Basilosaurus much clearer. It was not merely drifting through the sea like a long corpse, not merely feeding passively on carrion. It may have been an apex predator of the Eocene sea-hunting living prey, including smaller whales. There is something especially chilling about the thought of whales hunting whales. Whales often give us a feeling of closeness, intelligence, breath, young, and care. But in nature, closeness does not remove predation. A creature may be a mammal, may breathe air, may give birth, may care for its young, and still be a fearsome predator. Basilosaurus reminds us that the ocean does not divide the world according to human emotion. It has only bodies, needs, opportunities, and instinct. Imagine an afternoon beneath the Eocene water. The light slants downward, more golden, softer. A group of young Dorudon moves through shallower water, where everything seems peaceful. Their small bodies glide along, occasionally changing direction with the current. Far away a shape as long as night begins to appear. At first it is unclear. It may be only a dark streak within the water. But then the head appears. The jaws open. Teeth catch the light for a brief moment. Basilosaurus does not need to rush forward like a shark in modern imagination. Its long body can approach with a steady rhythm, fast enough, strong enough, sudden enough to turn calm water into a hunting scene. What makes Basilosaurus so fascinating in this story is that it stands on the boundary between two images. On one side is the whale, a creature we often think of as a symbol of depth, sound, and stillness. On the other side is the sea monster, a long-toothed predator emerging from warm water like a very old memory of fear. Basilosaurus is not a mythical sea monster. It does not need embellishment. It is strange enough in its truth, an ancient whale with a serpent-like body once swimming through the Eocene Sea with evidence that it ate even smaller whales. But the story of predatory whales does not end in the Eocene. Time continues to flow. The oceans change shape. Climate changes. Currents change. Ancient whale groups disappear, while new whale lineages continue to evolve. Some follow the path of filter feeding, becoming the ancestors of the great baleen whales of later times. Others follow the path of sound-teeth echolocation and hunting. And in a distant Miocene ocean, tens of millions of years after Basilosaurus evolution, creates one of the most terrifying images ever to belong to whales' Leviathan. Leviathan melville is a name that almost already carries the weight of myth. Leviathan recalls Leviathan, the sea monster of ancient tradition, while Melville evokes Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick. But here what matters is to keep the story in the light of fossils. Leviathan is not a literary monster stepping out from the page. It is a real ancient sperm whale described from fossils found in Peru. And what remains of it is enough to make modern imagination fall silent. Let us begin with the head. The skull of Leviathan was about 3 meters long. The head alone was nearly the length of a small car. In its jaws were large teeth, not only in the lower jaw, as in modern sperm whales, but in both the upper and lower jaws. Those teeth could be more than 36 centimeters long, deeply rooted solid, made not for filtering tiny organisms, nor simply for holding soft prey, but for biting, gripping, tearing, and handling large prey. If Basilosaurus is the long serpent shadow of the Eocene Sea, Leviathan is the gigantic head of the Miocene Sea, a predatory sperm whale carrying within it a strange combination of familiar imagination and entirely new fear. Modern sperm whales are already enough to inspire awe in human beings because of their size, their ability to dive deep, and their hunts for giant squid in darkness. But Leviathan belonged to a different kind of sperm whale. It was not only a diver of the abyss. It was a large predator with large teeth in both jaws, living in an ocean where many other whale species were also developing. Imagine the waters off Peru during the Miocene. The sea is rich in nutrients. Ocean currents feed a dense ecosystem. Fish, ancient seals, ancient dolphins, small baleen whales, and many other marine creatures move through these waters. There, the energy of the ocean gathers into larger bodies, fattier bodies, bodies with more flesh. And where there is large prey evolution can create large predators. Leviathan moves through those waters as a heavy presence. It does not need the long neck of a plesiosaur. It does not need the lizard-like body of a mosasaur. It does not need the armored jaw of Dunkleosteus. It is a mammal breathing air, warm-blooded, carrying a whale brain, yet bearing a set of teeth that places it among the most formidable predators in the history of the sea. From a distance, it may look like a large whale swimming. But when it turns its head, when the mouth opens, when the teeth appear in the water, that familiarity immediately becomes something frightening. Here, fear is no longer the fear of a world completely alien like the Cambrian, nor is it the fear of marine reptiles that have vanished from the ocean. It is closer, warmer, more familiar. Because whales are still with us today, they still surface to breathe beneath the modern sky. They still sing in the deep sea. They still appear in nature documentaries as symbols of natural beauty. And precisely for that reason, when we look back at Leviathan, the feeling becomes far stranger. A lineage of beings we often love once created a predatory form that could make even ancient oceans feel heavier. Let the scene unfold very slowly. A small baleen whale is swimming through bright water. It is not a giant like the modern blue whale. It belongs to a time when many whale lineages are still smaller, still diversifying, still searching for different ways of life in the sea. Far behind it, a large mass changes direction. Leviathan senses movement. It approaches, not with noise, not with a roar, only with mass, with the thrust of its body, with a heavy head and a jaw that nature has turned into a hunting tool. The prey may change direction. It may try to dive deeper. It may accelerate. But Leviathan is not a mindless shadow. It is a predator of large animals, a body made to deal with creatures that struggle, flee, and live in the same ocean as it does. As the distance narrows, the mouth opens. Long teeth appear like white stakes beneath the water. A bite may not only hold the prey, but damage its ability to swim, tear tissue, and turn a pursuit into an ending. We do not need to describe the scene too brutally. The ancient ocean is already powerful enough in its silence. Just thinking of a whale with teeth that large hunting other marine animals in waters rich with life is enough to give this chapter a different color. For the monster here is no longer something outside the family tree of familiar beings. It is a branch of whales, a distant relative of deep-sea songs, yet belonging to a past where teeth and jaws could define power. Perhaps this helps us look at modern whales with deeper eyes. Not to fear them, but to understand that their history is wider than the gentle symbols we often hold in our minds. Whale evolution is an extraordinary story, from land mammals returning to the sea to bodies living completely in water. From ancient whales like Basilosaurus to toothed whales, baleen whales, sperm whales, dolphins, killer whales, and the filtering giants of today. Within that story, there is beauty, adaptation, care for young sound, and intelligence. But there is also predation, teeth, bite marks, competition, and death. The Miocene Ocean, where Leviathan lived, was not a peaceful place simply because it had whales. It was a dynamic world rich in food, rich in large marine life, and therefore rich in hunts. In such a place, size is not only majesty, it is necessity. A large body requires great energy. A large predator needs worthy prey. And when other whale species begin to diversify in the sea, they do not only open up the beauty of a new age, they also open opportunities for hunters like Leviathan. If Basilosaurus shows us that whales could become long predatory shadows in the Eocene Sea, then Leviathan shows us that whales could become one of the most fearsome sets of jaws in the Miocene Sea, one species like an ancient serpent shadow, another like a predatory sperm whale of fossil myth. Together, they remind us that the ocean is never simple. It does not divide creatures into gentle and savage the way human beings tell stories. It only preserves the bodies that can survive under the conditions of their age. And then, like every dynasty before them, those ancient predatory whales do not remain forever. Basilosaurus disappears. Leviathan disappears. The seas that once nourished them change. The prey changes. The climate changes. Other evolutionary lineages continue moving forward, leaving behind in stone skulls, teeth, ribs, and traces just sufficient for humans to piece together part of the story. We cannot hear the water as Basilosaurus swam through Wadi al-Hitan. We cannot stand before Leviathan in the Miocene Sea and live to tell the tale. But fossils preserve one important truth evidence, that whales once had chapters far more violent than the peaceful image they carry today. Hold on to the final image of this chapter. An ancient sea at dusk. No boats, no lighthouse, no human voices calling from shore. Only water stretching into the distance, fading light, and somewhere below, an ancient whale swimming through the darkness. It surfaces for a moment to breathe. Its breath breaks the surface, then dissolves into the air. After that, the great body sinks again, carrying teeth, instinct, strength, and a history that the seafloor will preserve for millions of years. Perhaps the most frightening thing in this chapter is not that whales once hunted. It is that the ocean can turn even the creatures closest to our emotions into forms of ancient power. Whales can sing. Whales can care for their young. Whales can move human beings when we see them rising from the blue sea. But in the very distant past, whales could also be the dark shadows that made other creatures flee. And as we leave the waters of Basilosaurus and Leviathan, the ocean has not finished its experiments. Another shadow is waiting ahead. Not a whale, not a reptile, not an armored fish, but a predator whose familiar form makes human beings even more uneasy, the shark. But that is the story of the final chapter, when a single fossil tooth is enough to open the image of a gigantic shadow beneath the water. There are fears that no longer exist, yet still continue to haunt the human imagination. They only need to leave behind a trace, a bone, a bite mark, a shadow carved into stone, or sometimes only a tooth lying silently in the palm of your hand, heavier than you expected, sharper than you imagined, and so ancient that every city, every road, every human story suddenly feels too young before it. Imagine you are standing in a quiet museum room. Outside, the modern world is still moving, cars, lights, human voices, familiar days passing by. But before you, behind a pane of clear glass, is an object strangely small compared to the creature that once carried it. A fossilized tooth of Megalodon. Along its edge are fine serrations like a blade that has fallen asleep inside stone. Its root is thick and wide-colored deep brown, black-gray, or ancient ivory, depending on the layer of sediment that held it for millions of years. It does not move. It makes no sound. It is no longer attached to any gigantic jaw. But just by looking at it, the imagination is immediately pulled down into the deep sea. We begin to see the water darken. We see the light above breaking into faint blue streaks. We see a school of fish change direction very quickly, as though something has just passed beneath them. Then in deeper water, where every outline becomes slower and heavier, a dark shadow begins to take shape. No roar is needed. No violent spectacle is needed. Only the body of a gigantic shark swimming through an ancient ocean so silent that the silence itself is what sends a chill through the spine. Megalodon no longer lives in the sea today. There is no reliable scientific evidence showing that it is still hiding in unexplored depths. Stories of a giant shark still existing somewhere out there belong to film's rumors and the ancient human fear of whatever lies beneath the surface of the water. But the truth is already powerful enough. Megalodon does not need to be alive to become a legend. It truly existed. It once hunted in ancient oceans. and the teeth it left behind are proof that there was a time when the sea carried within it a shadow larger than almost any fear we have ever imagined. The strange thing is that we do not have a complete skeleton to see that entire body. Sharks have skeletons made mostly of cartilage, and cartilage is rarely preserved as well as bone through geological time. So, Megalodon emerges from the past, not as an intact body, but through the fragments that remain teeth, a number of vertebrae, and traces that allow scientists to slowly reconstruct its shape. That absence makes it even more haunting. We cannot see everything, so imagination must complete the rest. And from one tooth lying still behind glass, an entire lost ocean begins to open. Imagine a Miocene sea millions of years before the first humans appeared. The surface stretches beneath a warmer sky. Ocean currents carry food through the water. Fish sea turtles, ancient dolphins, ancient seals, and many smaller whales move through coastal waters and open seas. This is not an empty ocean. This is a world rich with energy, where large bodies can exist because there is enough prey to sustain them. And in that world, Megalodon is not a lonely ghost. It is part of a vast predatory network, an apex hunter created by the very abundance of the sea. From a distance, a Megalodon may not appear like a monster in a movie scene. It does not need to burst out of the water with an imagined roar. It is a shark. And sharks in their cold beauty are often most frightening when they are silent. A great body glides through gray-blue water. A powerful tail drives it forward. A broad head, a large mouth, rows of teeth, replaced again and again throughout life. No unnecessary haste. No anger. Only a body born to swim, search, approach, bite, and disappear. What makes Megalodon special is the combination of familiarity and impossibility. Sharks still live in the ocean today, so its basic shape is not entirely alien to us. We know how the silhouette of a dorsal fin cutting through the surface can slow the human heart. We know the psychological power of seeing a shark's shadow beneath a swimmer. But Megalodon pushes that familiar fear to an ancient scale. It is not a creature with a completely strange body like Anomalocaris. Not a sea scorpion crawling through mud. Not an ancient whale with a long body like Basilosaurus. It is frightening because it resembles something we already know, only far larger, far older, and placed in an ocean where smaller whales could become prey. Picture a small whale of the Miocene swimming near the coast. It rises to breathe, then sinks again into the bright water. Its body is larger than many fish, but in that ocean size does not always mean safety. From below or behind, a great shadow is approaching. Perhaps the prey does not notice immediately. Underwater distance can deceive. A large object far away may seem slow until suddenly it becomes far too close. Megalodon does not need to chase forever. For a large predator, the decisive moment may be one approach from the right angle, one bite into a vital part of the body, one strike that damages the prey's ability to swim. Bite marks on the bones of ancient whales and marine mammals show that Megalodon fed on large prey, such as small whales and other marine mammals. Smithsonian Ocean describes how tooth marks on fossils help scientists infer feeding behavior, including the possibility that large prey could be attacked in the chest region where Megalodon's teeth were strong enough to pierce tough ribs. A fossil study from Peru also recorded bite marks attributed to Megalodon on the bones of small baleen whales and other marine mammals. But in this story, we do not need to turn Megalodon into a simple killing machine. An apex predator does not succeed in every hunt. It also must spend energy. It depends on prey. It needs the right environment. It is bound by climate currents, breeding grounds, and changes in the ecosystem. The greatness of Megalodon does not place it outside nature. On the contrary, it makes it even more dependent on nature. The larger the body, the greater the need. The higher a predator stands in the food chain, the more vulnerable it becomes when the foundation below it begins to change. Let that seascape slow down. A warm coastal water where young whales may pass through, where young sharks may find safer places to grow, where the sea both nourishes life and hides danger. In waters like these, Megalodon is not only a gigantic individual in the open ocean, it may belong to a more complex life, being born, growing, replacing teeth, hunting, moving with food sources, competing with other predators, and finally dying, leaving behind its hardest parts in the sediment. A tooth falls to the seafloor. To the animal that is only a normal part of shark life, because sharks continually replace their teeth. But for the future, that tooth becomes a letter from a lost world. It is covered by mud. Minerals seep through it. Its color changes. Millions of years pass. Seas withdraw. The seafloor rises. And one day, someone finds that tooth in stone, on a riverbank, in a sediment deposit, or in a layer of earth that was once an ancient seabed. In that moment, the distance between modern human beings and the Miocene ocean suddenly shrinks to the weight of an object in the palm of the hand. Perhaps this is why Megalodon haunts us more than many other ancient creatures. It leaves behind fossils that are recognizable, intimate, and possible to hold. A dinosaur tooth can inspire awe, but a giant shark tooth strikes directly at the human fear of the deep sea. We do not need to study much anatomy to understand it. We see the serrated edge and know it was made to cut. We see the size and know that the mouth that once held it was larger than ordinary imagination. We see the simplicity of that triangular shape and realize that nature does not need much decoration to create fear. But Megalodon does not live only in the scientific past. It also lives in modern culture as an enlarged shadow. Films, novels, online images, and sensational stories often like to imagine that it still exists somewhere in the abyss beyond the reach of human detection. The idea is compelling because the ocean still holds many mysteries. But compelling does not mean true. Scientists affirm that Megalodon is extinct. If a giant shark like that still existed, it would leave clear ecological traces. Whale carcasses bitten in distinctive ways, newly shed teeth, a presence in the modern food chain, or evidence that could not be overlooked. We do not have such evidence. And in truth, the fact that it is extinct does not make the story less frightening. On the contrary, it makes the story deeper. Megalodon reminds us that even creatures that seem invincible can disappear. A predator that ruled the ocean for millions of years still could not resist every change in climate, prey availability, competition, and habitat. The Natural History Museum in London notes that the exact moment when the last individual Megalodon died is still not known with certainty, but reliable evidence indicates that it disappeared before or by the end of the Pliocene, with some studies proposing a date of around 3.6 million years ago. Imagine the final oceans of Megalodon. Waters are cooling in many places. Sea levels are changing. Important coastal regions may be shrinking or transforming. Whale species are changing in size, behavior, and migration routes. Other predators, smaller and more flexible, may compete in new spaces. Megalodon is still large, still powerful, still terrifying, but the strength of one individual cannot solve every disturbance of the planet. A gigantic jaw cannot bite into climate. A great body cannot command its prey to return. And when the world changes for long enough, even the largest shadow can fade. There is a quiet sadness in that ending. Not sadness because a monster has vanished, but because we are seeing the common law of every dynasty beneath the water. Anomalocaris was once one of the first predators of the primordial sea, then disappeared. Sea scorpions once crawled through shallow waters, then disappeared. Dunkleosteus once carried the armored jaw of the Devonian, then disappeared. Marine reptiles once took possession of the ocean after the Great Extinction, then disappeared. Ancient predatory whales once created terrifying forms such as Basilosaurus and Leviathan, and they too are gone. Megalodon, though the most famous in modern imagination, still belongs to that same current. No throne beneath the ocean is eternal. Return to the tooth in the palm of the hand. It is not only evidence of a large shark, it is the remnant of an ecosystem, a climate, a food chain, a lost marine world. It once sat in the jaw of a living animal. It once touched water, flesh, bone, and the currents of an ocean no human ever witnessed. Then it fell out, sank, fossilized, and waited for a span of time longer than the entire history of humankind, many times over. When we look at it today, we are not only looking at a tooth, we are looking at a depth of time so great that the mind struggles to hold it. In this final chapter, Megalodon is the last shadow, not because it is the final ancient creature of the sea, but because it stands closer to the edge of our world than the monsters before it. It lived much later than Anomalocaris, Dunkleosteus, or mosasaurs. It belonged to an ocean that already had whales, dolphin seals, and forms of life that feel more familiar to us within the modern sea. That closeness makes it even more haunting. It does not come from a biological planet too distant to imagine. It swam in a world moving closer to our own, then vanished only a few million years before modern humans could tell stories about it. Picture the ancient sea on a late afternoon. Light stretches across the waves in long silver bands. A school of fish moves near the surface. Farther away, a small whale rises to breathe, then sinks again. Everything seems ordinary, almost peaceful. But below, in the dark blue layer of water, a large shape is swimming past. It does not hurry. It does not need to be seen. It moves as part of the sea, as though the ocean has created a shadow with teeth. A shadow large enough to make other creatures change their course, real enough to leave marks on bone, powerful enough to live in the human imagination long after it has vanished. And then one day that shadow is gone. There are no witnesses, no final scene recorded, no human being standing on the shore to see the last megalodon disappear beneath the surface. Extinction often has no sound. It is only a gap that slowly appears. Fewer new teeth in the sediment. Fewer bite marks on the bones of prey. Less presence in the oceans. Then at last, nothing remains but fossils. No fin cutting through the surface. No jaw opening in the darkness. No black shadow beneath ancient whales. Only stone holding the fragments of evidence. Perhaps that is why the ancient ocean is both frightening and quietly beautiful. It does not keep its creatures forever. It creates them, tests them, nourishes them, and then lets them leave the story when the world changes. All the monsters we have passed through in this journey from the first predators to the tooth of Megalodon are not monsters in the mythological sense. They are life. Life in fierce and alien shapes, sometimes beyond human imagination, but still real life, bound by real time. And when the original question returns, were the ancient oceans more terrifying than you think the answer may be? Yes. But not because they were like a horror film. They were terrifying because they were real. Because there were once seas where an animal less than a meter long could be a formidable predator. There were once shallow waters where armored sea scorpions crawled through the mud. There was once a Devonian jaw closing like a blade of bone. There were once marine reptiles rising to breathe beneath a Mesozoic sky. There was once an inland sea filled with mosasaurs, giant fish, and layered hunts. There were once whales that became predators. And there was once Megalodon, a gigantic shark, now dead, yet still powerful enough to make the modern ocean, in our imagination, a little darker. Now let that fossil tooth rest once more in the soft shadow of the museum. Let the Miocene sea close. Let the shadow of Megalodon sink one final time in this story, not as a creature still hiding somewhere, but as a gigantic memory of Earth. A memory that the sea is not only the beautiful blue space on a map, not only the soothing sound of waves at night, but also a deep stage where life once created forms that millions of years later can still make human beings fall silent when they look down at the water. And if tonight you hear the sound of waves, or even only imagine waves in the quiet room around you, remember that beneath that gentle sound is a very long history. A history of darkness, teeth fins, armor, breath, hunting disappearance, and fossils. Megalodon is only the final shadow in this journey, but behind it lies an entire ancient ocean that changed the face of fear many times. And then, like every wave, the story slowly withdraws into the distance. And now, as the final dark shadows of the ancient ocean slowly sink back into the deep waters, tonight's journey also gently comes to its end. We have traveled through an Earth that no longer resembles the world we know. A place with no engines, no city lights reflected on the sea, no human footprints on the sand, only water, stone, mud, dim light, and life quietly changing across stretches of time so vast that the human mind can hardly imagine them fully. We have met the first predators of the primordial sea scorpions, silently crawling through shallow waters. Dunkleosteus, with the armored jaw of the Devonian marine reptiles that ruled after the great extinction. Mosasaurs and giant fish in the Cretaceous inland sea. Ancient whales that once became killers. And finally, Megalodon, the dark shadow that still haunts the human imagination, even though it vanished millions of years ago. Perhaps what makes the ancient ocean frightening is not only the size of the creatures that once lived there. It is the feeling that beneath the surface, life has always been capable of creating forms far beyond anything we can imagine. Every fossil left behind is like a whisper from a lost seafloor, reminding us that Earth once held worlds stranger than myth. If you have listened all the way to these final minutes, thank you so much. Let me know where you are listening from and where you would like our next journey to take us: another ocean, a lost civilization, or an ancient creature even more mysterious. And if you enjoy slow bedtime stories like this, follow the fan page or subscribe to the channel so we can continue stepping together into deeper, farther, and quieter nights of storytelling.